Looks good. That's good. Ooh.
colors on that one.
Ooh, oh, ooh. That is really, really pretty.
The
Ooh,
box elder burl.
ooh, with that, I like that. That's my third favorite color is green.
I was wearing a green shirt, so
Oh, perfect, yeah.
I don't use the pen. I just
Hey, it just looks good, it matches.
Yeah.
Now that is very pretty. In a manly sort of way, since you're,
actually got good news. I went to a job interview today.
yeah.
It was a position as a shipping clerk, and the HR lady told me that she didn't think the shipping clerk was a good fit for me. I said, okay. She says, actually, we have a recent opening position as a warehouse supervisor that we think you'd be a better fit for, which is about $15,000 more. So I was like,
Yeah.
okay.
Oh, yeah, hey, it works for me. Yeah. Good, how did you get it?
I have to go to the restroom.
You didn't raise your hand. Yeah, okay, you can go. Okay, you can go.
I should have went while I was walking past, but I didn't.
She got a bladder the size of a pea.
Because I was showing my mom. I mean, it was just so itty bitty. I mean, just, you know. We prepared to make a lot of, we looked anywhere with her for very long. We made a lot of stops.
I was quite surprised when she made that statement. I told her, yeah, I'm definitely interested, so.
Oh, good. What did you get?
Number two.
Has she found any, thing about any, getting rid of your lovely gophers or whatever it is? I don't know how you can keep them away. I just don't.
We have been fighting that and fighting that. So.
Hi, Pat.
Hi.
Well, I didn't know if I needed a coat or didn't need a coat.
Hello, Chris.
It's cool out there.
Good evening. I actually had an interesting chain of events today. Went to this place called Associated Wholesale Grocers Distribution Place on 5600 South Council. It was actually a position for a shipping clerk. And I get there, I was talking, you know, she's looking at my resume. She says, actually, I don't think the shipping clerk position would be a good fit for you. Come again? She said, actually, she said, we have a position, recently opened position for a warehouse supervisor that we think you'd be a better fit for. I'm interested. So they're supposed to call me back Monday or Tuesday and for a second interview, so things look promising.
Well, good.
Yeah, it's good.
Crest is also looking for help in their warehouse.
Really?
Yep.
Okay, I'll check it out.
They've been advertising in their store. I don't know what kind of help or anything, but
I'm not looking, I don't want to work inside a grocery store, but in, you know, distribution warehouse.
no, this was their distribution warehouse.
So, like I said, nice surprising chain of events.
Yeah.
Did you not get done with Genesis last week?
Yeah, I got done with Genesis. I'm on Exodus now, can't you
Started
see?
Exodus last week?
I did.
How far did you get?
Well, we're on verses 17 through 21 right now, just about finished with that. And that means, of course, that we will answer the questions tonight.
No, actually, on Netflix, they have a,
Maybe I missed it. I told him you weren't through. I'm sorry,
you
Tom.
guys use Netflix in the house, Dale?
Nope. I've never looked at Netflix.
Netflix has a miniseries.
Question.
Answer.
Trying to figure out. Which blank do you think would work best for her school?
What?
What blank do you think would work best for a pen for Madeline's school?
What plant?
What blank?
Blank.
What colors? Color
I don't know
combinations
what
there.
color she likes.
It's her school colors, but which one do you think would look better?
Oh. Well, I don't like that side, but I like that side, I like that side, and I like that side. So
keep that side out of what you're saying?
You won't see that, cause it'll go away as it's being turned.
Yeah, this side and this side is really pretty. And I like it better than this because it's got a little white in it, so it's a little bit more contrasting, where that one's all pretty much
Well,
red.
the colors are maroon and gray, so that's why we picked up both these, but it's got gray in it, so I'm thinking this more. That's kind of what I was thinking.
I like that one the best, my personal opinion, but.
That's what I was thinking.
Materials underneath it.
But you don't like that one? You like that one?
I thought you
I don't like solid.
Oh, yeah.
It's not gonna be solid.
You know, whether you realize it or not, my school colors was maroon and white. We were Texas Line
So
Tornadoes.
you need this one, is what you're saying?
No, I was just telling you.
you.
Mine was not maroon and gray, it was maroon and
I'll
white.
keep cutting away
But
where
hers
it's
was
there.
maroon and gray.
Okay,
Well,
She's the one
That-
graduating right now.
That's the thing
Huh?
about
She's the one
doing
graduating right
those.
now.
that's true.
And he promised her.
you don't usually come to the
Yes, so he's taking two of them.
Okay.
yeah.
cutting away.
Jensen?
Keep cutting away from what you want.
Jensen? Jensen!
Boy, get all loud there.
I already signed it,
Gee.
Signed what?
the 3 things he had in it.
Yeah, well, that wasn't why I was trying to get your attention.
Oh.
Hello, Billy. Curtis is in room 101 in Bradford Village.
101, I didn't have
And
that
maybe-
one.
He's in Bradford Village now. I sent an email list out, but you probably didn't.
I don't get to do that.
I'm sorry.
Sharon didn't tell me about it.
guys
Huh? Oh,
She had felt like looking at me.
What'd you say? You were right, we should have moved them.
and also, I don't think you've announced,
Yeah, it was fun. And we take turns.
I'll give it to her, Lois, just one.
oh, just one.
She can lose it.
Vera's new address.
Take turns.
She moved? Yeah, I sent an email message down on that too. Y'all just never look at the emails. huh?
I did, I got the Bradford Village, and you just sent yours?
She's in apartment 17 now.
Yesterday.
Oh, she just moved on.
She's okay, but
Right.
she had a hairline wrapped on her wrist.
I sent it out a week ago.
That stitches
I get
in,
it.
but she's
I'm
okay.
sorry.
I think she's home now, I'm pretty
She
sure.
said that just before he left the
He
church.
made sure you were not in the.
We got there, but I don't think she was
No,
there.
no, it was.
Room 17.
Oh, it's okay.
Apartment 17.
Still,
I don't think I'm trying to say they.
Well, I didn't even bring them.
You bet she would find out, okay, your first is something and all that.
not always true.
But she's.
We were still on June.
And also,
I did miss that word.
she has a new phone number, so if you don't have that, I'll have to give it to you because I've got it at home. I don't
Yeah,
have
I
it
didn't have
here.
the phone number.
Okay.
She got a new number in that room.
Right, because when they change rooms, they get a different phone number because it's attached to that room.
Oh, we know exactly who you are.
But we were anxious.
All right, the clock on the wall says it's time to begin. What?
It says 10.
I didn't even hear that.
I think that was it.
Oh,
The first
Exodus.
we're in Exodus, the first chapter. We're going to read beginning in verse 17 tonight. We had talked a little bit about it, and then we'll answer the questions tonight, and then we'll get into chapter 2 of Exodus. I don't know of any. Sharon, of course, is still not able to get out, and for those of you that didn't get, well, I didn't send this message out. Curtis Boyd is now in Bradford Village. I sent that out, but he's in room 101. And he'll probably be there for a couple of weeks. So I went and visited with him today. He'd love to have visitors because it gets kind of lonely, but he said, they're working me like a dog in there. I said, well, they're trying to get you home. So, and also, Vera changed apartments in Silver Elm, so she's in 17 now instead of 11. The reason being is because the neighbor had a dog, and the neighbor was getting very sick and wouldn't let anybody come in and take care of the dog, and so you know what the dog did. And the odor was too much to bear, so they moved her. So her granddaughter's been helping her move this week as well, or last week. So. But other than that, I don't have any other announcements, so let's go to our Heavenly Father in prayer. Our most loving Heavenly Father, we thank Thee so much for this day, for the many blessings You've given us. We thank Thee for the moisture that we received, and we thank Thee for the spiritual blessings. We thank Thee for our upcoming gospel meeting, and we pray that You'd be with Brother Jenkins as he prepares the lessons, that it would be a successful gospel meeting. We're thankful for each and every member of this congregation and the talents that each brings to the work here at this congregation, that truly we can grow spiritually, and with that spiritual growth would be numerical growth. We ask, Father, that You'd be with our members who have physical ailments. We know of our sister Sharon Knipp, that she might have a speedy recovery from her injuries and her illness, that she can continue to worship Thee as she desires. And we ask also, Father, that You would be with our members who, due to age and poor health, are not able to get out the way they once did. Use us as instruments that we might reach out and help them in any way that we can. We're thankful, Father, for the book of Exodus as we continue our study and looking at the children of Israel and their journey and the things that You expect us to know, so that we might be able to apply them to our lives, to have a better understanding of those things You want us to know, and be better able to teach and encourage others, that they might know the joys of being a Christian before it's everlasting too late. These things we ask in Jesus Christ's holy name. Amen.
Amen.
All right, the Buxtons, they're still on vacation. They'll be gone through, I think they get back Sunday night, so that's why they're not here. Let's begin by reading. This is where, remember, there's a new Pharaoh now. This new Pharaoh really didn't know Joseph, really doesn't know the children of Israel. And so there's a fear taking place here because of the fact that the Israelites are growing significantly in numbers. And so this Pharaoh has given a decree, or given direction to the midwives. And so that's where we are in verses 17 through 21. Now, Isaac, let's go ahead and read that again, and then we'll talk about verse 21 specifically, since we've already talked a little bit about it. And if anybody has any questions about any part of it, don't hesitate to ask, all right? Or to state your thoughts. So go ahead, Isaac.
But the midwives feared God, and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the male children alive. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said to them, Why have you done this thing, and saved the male children alive? And the midwives said to the Pharaoh, Because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are lively and give birth before the midwives come to them. Therefore God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very mighty. And so it was, because of the midwives feared God, that He provided households for them.
All right, so other versions might use, in verse 21, might say, and it came to pass. And what we have here is most other versions translate houses here as households or families, rather than thinking of a physical structure here. Okay, the reward of faithfulness has always been a prominent feature of God's dealings with man, and some refer to this to the Israelites, or refer this to the Israelites, because the word them in verse 21 is of the masculine gender, and therefore cannot, they think, be meant of the midwives, but must be interpreted by this means the children of Israel were exceedingly increased. Therefore, this verse should be a continuation of verse 20. So look again at verse 20. It says, Therefore God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very mighty. And so it was, because the midwives feared God, that He provided households for them. Talking about the family and not the physical structure of a building. Any comments on verse 21? All right, let's look at verse 22 then. Chris, you want to read that?
And Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, Every son that is born you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive.
Okay, so this decree was in force at the birth of Moses, and it's important to bring that out because when we get into chapter 2, we're going to see that more. So, 64 years after the death of Joseph is when this is taking place, and was probably enacted soon after the birth of his elder brother, talking about Moses, his elder brother Aaron, okay? Which he was born 3 years before Moses was. Yes, John?
How many years after the death of Joseph?
64 years.
They were in captivity 400 years.
Yeah. And they're still in captivity.
This is when the change takes place.
Do what?
This is when the change takes place from benevolence
Yes,
to abhorrence.
yes, yes. And Aaron, of course, was 3 years older than Moses. We may date it, therefore, about 32nd year of their bondage, okay, at this point. They've been in bondage for 32 years, and about 133 years after their settlement at this point, okay? This is not when they are released from bondage. They're still very much entrenched in their bondage at this point. Not being able to effect his end by the midwives, though, Pharaoh commanded everybody to inform his officers when any Hebrew woman fell in labor and appointed searchers for these women that are in labor. It is likely to examine whether they were delivered of male or female and to act according to what is here ordered. Some make this the sense of the two last verses, because the midwives feared God, and thereby the families of the Israelites were increased, not diminished. Pharaoh took a new course and charged all his people to see that done which the midwives refused to do. Yes, Cal?
Well, I think what the writer here is kind of collapsing time together, compressing it.
Yeah.
And so it looks like everything's happening real fast, but they lived in perfect peace for a period of time.
Right.
Then,
now they're under a new Pharaoh.
Then a new Pharaoh, well, before the new Pharaoh came in, they
Yeah.
lived in peace.
Yeah.
Then a new Pharaoh came in who didn't know them, that didn't have the same relationship with Joseph and the Hebrews that the old Pharaohs did.
Right.
And over a period of time, I think what happens, as he continued to grow, more and more people, he becomes aframed, and then he starts putting in these different actions to try to suppress the people in their growth.
Right.
So I don't think it happened overnight. I think it was over a period of time, different things were done.
Yeah.
Until a point we see where Moses is being born.
Right. John?
I have a problem with your times.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Joseph lived to be 110. He was 40 when they came there. 40 from 110.
Joseph
to
was 17 when he came to
when there
Egypt.
were the children of Israel came to
Yeah,
Egypt.
okay.
He was 40.
Yeah.
He lived to be 110.
Yeah.
That puts him at 70 when he died. 70 years they was there when he died.
Yeah.
Then 64 years after he died is only 135?
134.
134.
Yeah.
And then Moses is born at 134 years into captivity, and they were there 40 years. That's over 200 years. Moses wasn't but 120 when he died.
The point that I'm making here at this point, they have been in captivity 133 years, which is exactly the time frame that you just mentioned.
Not when Moses was born, though.
No, wait a minute. Your total was 134, and here's 133, so we're in disagreement of 1 year.
No, we're in disagreement of a bunch of years, because this is when Moses was born.
Okay.
There's a period of time that is not accounted for here.
Right.
Because what is
That's what
happening,
I'm
they are
saying.
living in the land, and it's normal day-to-day business, and gradually over a period of time, they become suppressed and persecuted, okay? So events go along, and what we're reading here is how these different events occurred.
Right.
Okay, first he did this, then he did this, then he did this. And then we have the account of Moses being born, okay? Well, yeah, we know what the total time was there, but I don't know what went on from the time that it mentions Joseph dying.
Right.
And other than the fact a new Pharaoh came in a period of time after that. And what happened between there and the time, other than we are told these different persecutions arose.
Right.
So
That's what I
we're
was
not,
saying.
yeah, we're not being told
You
what
said
the,
it better.
yeah, we're not,
These are
we're
the
not
dates
being
here.
told what the hours were, what the time
About
was.
1859 BC is when
Yeah.
Jacob was buried. The death of Joseph occurred 53 years later,
Yeah.
1806. And Exodus chapter 1 is 1800 BC.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Okay,
So here's where we're making a counting of the people that are in the land.
yeah,
And I think that probably, and I'm not sure if they count the time in Egypt from the time that Joseph brings the family down or until the time of Joseph's death.
right.
So, but someplace in that 50 years range is where they've been, again, counting to 430 years.
Right. Yeah. So, and I'm not trying to disagree with you, John, I'm just,
I was trying to say what he said, but you said it better.
okay. So we'll listen to Cal then.
That's what I'm saying, your numbers didn't add up the way you said them.
John, you can soften him up for me, and I'll finish him off.
Oh, y'all don't be, all right, so I'm gonna get you then. Let's go to the questions.
I didn't bring my questions.
Oh, well, you wanna borrow a book?
Yes, please.
Anybody else need a book?
You're gonna read them, aren't you?
I'll read them. Because I know you can't see them, Pat. So I'll read them for you, and you can tell me whether the first 5 are true or false, okay? First, Pharaoh ordered the murder of all children of the Hebrew people. True or false?
Oh,
It's false.
Oh, it's the baby.
Yeah, just the male
Just the
babies.
Male baby.
The Israelites bore many children in the land of Egypt. True or false?
True.
True. The midwives were rewarded by Pharaoh for their service. True or false?
false.
False. The Egyptians feared that the Hebrew people would become their enemies. True or false? True. The Hebrew midwives disobeyed the Pharaoh's orders. True. All right, multiple choice. Number 6. This chapter mentions the death of Joseph and A, his brethren, B, all of his generation, C, A and B, or D, none of these. It is C. Do what? Well, I heard C and C.
She said C.
Okay.
I think I said C.
Senor. All right, question number 7. Why did the Lord provide houses for the Hebrew midwives? A, they asked for them. B, they feared God. C, Pharaoh destroyed their homes. Now, I disagree with that question because he didn't provide houses. He provided
Households.
household. Okay? But
Another way of looking at that too.
how's that?
You can read it that he, because of the midwives' fears, he provided households for the children of Israel.
Yeah.
But I still had B.
But the answer is B though, right?
The verse, yeah, the answer is B because the verse does say houses, okay? Question number 8. What kind of work did the Egyptians force the children of Israel to perform? A, brick and mortar, B, service in the field, or C, A and B? Yeah, A and B. Number 9. Which of the following was not one of the Hebrew midwives? A, Shiphrah, B, Miriam, or C, Pew? B, okay. Number 10. What word did the king of Egypt that knew not Joseph use to describe his plan of action in dealing with the children of Israel? A, cruelly, B, wisely, or C, harshly? B. The answer is B. Wisely.
Wise from his standpoint.
Yes, it was wise from his
But he
standpoint.
didn't use the word wisely. He used cruel and harsh.
Yeah.
Says, come here, let us do
Yeah,
it.
it's true. Or true.
Verse 10.
King James depends on the
All right, I missed that one. My bad.
Verse 10.
the old King James.
Let us come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and it happen in the event of war that they also join our enemies and fight against us, and so go up out of the land. You use the King James Version, and the word shrewdly is the same as wisely.
Well, I put or shrewdly, so I got it right.
Okay, you got it.
I wrote it down, or
All right, I'll give you an A for that.
Which would be wrong.
All right, fill in the blanks. Number 11.
I kind of wonder now, if he had been treating them like God would want him to treat them, they would be a wonderful ally.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But he was more afraid because they seemed to be outgrowing the Egyptians.
Yeah.
They were going to grow so fast and everything in such large numbers that he was afraid they were going to take over the Egyptians. I'm guessing. I do. Yes.
No, it said that.
If you got a country, people living within your country,
Yeah.
they've already grown so big that you're scared of them. Why are you going to try making them mad by putting cruel and harsh work on them, having them be turned into slaves.
Well,
That's
because,
more of a way to get them to uprise against you than it was to leave them alone.
yeah, but they didn't have any weapons. That's the thing. And so, obviously this is the time that the Pharaoh felt that he had control of them. Question number 11. Therefore they did set over them blank to blank them with their burdens.
Taskmasters to afflict.
That's correct. Taskmasters to afflict. 12. And the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor. 13. Exodus what? 12 what?
37.
37. And the children of Israel journeyed from Ramesses to Succoth, about 600,000 on foot that were.
This was,
See, I didn't get that.
this was
Did
all
you
of us
get men?
They were beside the children.
Men.
The way it was
Men,
Yeah,
okay,
men.
men, so I got
The way
it.
the question's worded, you can't reason with it.
Well, you got men on there, so I got it
And
right.
he uses it, he writes them.
Isaac's got men on there, so he's got it right.
Right, yeah.
What translation did you use?
What's that?
Actually, you use-
Well, see, I put men and then I put question mark. So-
I'm using the New King James Version.
He's using New King James and you did the regular.
What's
King James version on here?
Yeah,
It's found-
most of these questions were based on the King James Version, but they should be pretty similar.
Well, kinda.
Kinda. Question number 14. Or no, wait. Yeah, 14. Now there arose up a new king over Egypt, which blank Joseph.
Did not know
Knew not Joseph. Okay. 15. Blank 4:20.
Deuteronomy.
Deuteronomy 4:20. But the Lord hath taken you and brought you forth out of the
Iron furnace.
iron furnace, even out of Egypt, to be unto him a people of inheritance as ye are this day. Any,
Had me digging in the Bible looking for that one. Huh?
that's the idea.
And the next chapter, boy, I was digging for
Well, you
hours,
can
boy.
continue to use
Just
this.
trying to find those last
Okay.
five, boy, with a booger. But hey, I was
Well-
flipping through the pages, and I liked it.
Look.
It's a good thing.
There's no wrong answer on those. The whole purpose of it is, in your study process and everything. If you don't answer the question, I'm not going to crucify you or anything, but we will answer the questions in here for those who really want to know the answers to them. But I accept the fact that some people are not comfortable with questions, and that's okay. But we'll have fun with them anyway.
I just don't like being wrong, that's all.
All right, let's look at chapter
Oh,
2.
ask them some grave.
I think the boat's inappropriate for the time period.
Do what?
I think the boat is inappropriate.
You don't like my boat?
Not for this time period.
Hey, I had to search all over for a picture like that. But you're right, that's not a good boat for this time. We should have had a basket made out of reeds,
There you
shouldn't
go.
we? Yeah.
There you go.
But anyway, what we're going to look at in chapter 2 is preparation of a deliverer. Okay, so we'll look at verses 1 through 25, and then also we may look at a little bit of chapter 18, verses 2 through 4, which is Moses' youth. Okay. So the first 5 verses, Exodus 2, verses 1 through 5. Let's see. Stephanie, I think it's your turn to read.
And a man of the house of Levi went and took as wife a daughter of Levi. So the woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a beautiful child, she hid him 3 months. But when she could no longer hide him, she took an ark of bulrushes for him, daubed it with asphalt and pitch, put the child in it, and laid it in the reeds by the river's bank. And his sister stood afar off to know what would be done to him. Then the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, and her maidens walked along the riverside. And when she saw the ark among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it.
All right. Now, the New King James Version in verse 2 uses the word beautiful
I
child.
hate to beat this dead horse on that time period, but if the rule to kill the male child come in effect a couple hundred years ago, how'd Aaron get to be about 6 or 7?
John, I'll go back and I'll get the time frame.
Because the midwives
The
didn't do it.
baby is Moses. There's already Aaron and Miriam.
chapter 2.
This is not easy, so
They do take big chunks of time.
Yeah.
I've noticed, I mean, big chunks and then
Well, I
into
know, but what
another
he said was
sentence.
that
All right.
30 years after
Can
Joseph,
beautiful child be godly child too?
they had to
That's
just
all.
No.
kill all
Good.
the male children.
Goodly?
Good.
Good.
Well, I think it's beautiful in the eyes of
All
God.
right.
In this particular book, is what's the answer to it.
Maybe I need to study
She
with
was
both
very ugly, he
kinds.
was an ugly child. She was
Ah, you're right. It is goodly. Yeah. But I don't ever see it saying it. Goodly. Must be on a different one.
All right, John, you probably can't see this, but if you go chapter 1, the beginning of chapter 1, 1800 BC, you get to verse 6 of chapter 1, we're dealing with 1700 BC. You get with verse 8, you're dealing 1600 BC. And you get to verse 22, you're dealing with 1539 BC. And then, in the beginning of chapter 2, birth and adoption of Moses is 1525 BC. Those are the dates.
That wasn't my question.
All that work.
You said around 1600, thereabouts, 17 to 16, is when Pharaoh put out his order to kill all the male children.
Well, no, I didn't say that. I said we may date it therefore about the 32nd year of their bondage and about 133 years after their settlement, is what I said in verse
They
22.
settled in 18.
So if you
About
go down these,
133 years of between 17 and 16.
there's 161 years between there and there.
But your settlement is back up there at 1800.
Exodus beginning in chapter 1 is 1800 BC.
They're already settled there.
Okay, John, I'll get it. I don't want to spend an hour on this, so
I don't either, but-
I'll write it out for you, and then you can decide on that. Okay? So I'm just recording what I got here, so I won't dispute your years,
But
because
I still-
quite honestly, it's not that important. The
I know.
differences in the years.
I know that,
I
but
think
my
the only
question
thing he's
was,
trying to get
how
is-
did Aaron get there?
How did
When
Aaron
he's
not
only
die?
3 to 6 years older than Moses?
He's 3 years older than
Three
Moses.
older than
Yeah,
Moses.
Yeah.
How'd they keep him alive and hid for 3 years?
Well,
Already born.
They didn't have that rule when he was born.
Yeah.
yeah, the Pharaoh didn't make that decree
he
when
was
Aaron
already
was born. He made the decree after Aaron was born.
So any babies
He
that
was
were
already
born
alive
male
already,
were
so
gonna
he
die.
was gonna get killed.
Right.
Not
If
any
anyone
that were already
born
born.
was gonna get killed after.
Besides all that, Aaron was just going to be a high priest. Moses was going to be the deliverer.
He was gonna be like a cowboy.
That's because Aaron could talk.
Yeah.
All right, so in verses 1 through 5, particularly in verse 2 of chapter 2, the New King James Version uses the word beautiful child. But if you're using the King James Version, which I know some of you are using,
That too.
the word is goodly child, okay? Men are not beautiful. Men are goodly. Women are beautiful. As the old song goes, women are made with sugar and spice and everything nice, and men are made with puppy dog tails and snails and snakes. Yeah. So we're goodly. We're not beautiful. Okay. So the point is, the word goodly or beautiful simply means handsome or good looking. And what mother would not find their child to be handsome or good looking?
Poor partial.
Of course, this was a dangerous act of rebelling against the clear order of the Pharaoh at this time. And according to the Pharaoh, the child being a male was to be cast into the river, going back to verse 22 of chapter 1. His intent being to gain greater control over these Hebrews, whom he feared. What courage is seen in this Levite family then to take and try to make sure this goodly child, this handsome child, is not destroyed. Their courage causes them to be listed in the great faith chapter, the New Testament, where it is said that they were not afraid of the king's commandment. Let's look at Hebrews 11 and verse 23. You had that, John?
Not yet, but I can get there.
Well, what's holding you back?
Oh, I'm just
Are you
saying
still
there-
focused on those years?
Well,
Yes,
she
Donna.
No, I'm
Put him in
just
the
thinking
river.
they done
It
what
technically
Pharaoh
was
said, they
cast
put
in
him
the
in the
river.
river.
Do what, Donna?
She did put him in the river.
Yes, she did.
He was cast in the river.
He didn't.
Well, that's true. She did.
Yeah.
She did obey. Nothing was said about the fact that she couldn't put him in a reed basket, though,
Yeah.
was it?
Yeah.
She
So,
didn't say how she had to throw him in the river, just put him in the river.
yeah, she did. All right, read Hebrews 11:23.
By faith Moses, when he was born, was hid 3 months by his parents because they saw he was a proper child and they were not afraid of the king's command.
All right. Now, Miriam, Moses' older sister. If Aaron was 3 years older than Moses, Miriam was probably about 10 years older than Moses, as it is evident from the history of this chapter and Aaron being 3 years older. But it does not appear that his preservation was attended with any peculiar difficulty. And from this we may infer with some degree of probability at least that the last bloody edict was not then enacted. And that's what we said a little bit earlier, that Aaron was born before the Pharaoh had made this decree. Aaron was born 83 years before the Exodus. And Joseph died about 145 years before the event. The edict then, therefore, could not be passed less than 62 years after the death of Joseph. Whenever the time comes that we are given orders by the civil government that would cause us to violate God's will, we need to look to Moses then, his parents, as an example to follow. We must, as Christians, obey God rather than men. This is what we found in Acts 5 and verse 29. Pat, you had that?
But Peter and the other apostles answered and said, we ought to obey God rather than men.
All right. And so we need to have the same attitude that Peter had, is if the laws of the land go against the laws of God, we obey God rather than man. Now, in verse 3 of Exodus chapter 2 says, she took an ark of bulrushes for him. Anybody know what bulrushes are?
Bamboo.
Kind of like
Row by the side of the river.
cattails.
Kind of like cattails.
Some kind of reed that they can weave together.
Yeah. Obviously, the stalk of the cattail
No,
you
leaves.
can't, but the leaves you can, yeah. And these grow on the banks of the Nile in the marshy ground, just like cattails do. The stalk rises to the height of 9 to 12 feet above the water. It is triangular and terminates in a crown of small filaments resembling hair. And this reed was of the greatest use to the Egyptians. The pith serving various the pith of the reed was food for them. The woody part was used to build vessels, and these vessels frequently appear on various monuments of Egyptian antiquity. Boats were made of this reed, and is also attested by this is in the Treasury of Scripture Knowledge, where this came from. A man by the name of Pliny, Pliny, and others suggested that these reeds were used to make boats. They wouldn't have been large boats, they'd have been small boats and everything, that they could float on the Nile River. Any comments on that part?
Well, you'll still see the same type of craft over there if you go into the remoter parts of Egypt there.
Yeah.
They still make them, boys still make them, like to play on the river, stuff like that. Still be done.
Now, verse 4, where it says, and his sister stood afar off to know what would be done to him. There are many parts of the Bible that are quite humorous in a subtle way, if you will. The Pharaoh said, throw the male babies into the river, and you folks already picked up on this. Here the parents of Moses had devised a careful plan to do just that. And in doing so, they took safeguards for the protection of the child, in this case, the sister. Moses was cast into the river, but it was done gently inside a device that would keep them from harm. And into whose home does the child wind up? And that is the home of one who ordered all male Hebrew babies to be thrown into the river. Of course, we can see the providential care of God in the protection of this child. Certainly was given at this point. Now, I think everybody knows the pith that was used to make this, or pitch, asphalt and pitch is kind of, it's not like our tar, but it's something that would put around the reeds in this basket to make sure water did not seep in. Everything it made sure that it was secure in that way, so the basket didn't sink into the river.
Watertight.
Yeah. Any comments through verse 4, through verse 5? All right, let's look at verses 6 through 9. Jensen, you want to read that for me, please? Read 6 through 10, if you will.
Okay. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby wept. So she had compassion on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrew children." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call a nurse for you from the Hebrew woman, that she may nurse the child for you?" And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." So the maiden went and called the child's mother. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages." You said through 9, right?
Through 10.
Oh. So the woman took the child and nursed him, and the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. So she called his name Moses, saying, "Because I drew him out of the water."
Okay, so that phrase, "and the child grew," with the enormous advantage of having his own Hebrew mother to nurse him and care for him and teach him about his people, coupled with the advantages of living in Pharaoh's household, Moses was receiving the best kind of training for the task God would call him to accomplish. It's important to keep that in mind, because here, when Moses becomes an adult, the first thing we're going to see towards the end of chapter 2 is he kills an Egyptian. Now, how would he know that he was a Hebrew had it not been for his mother training him those few years that she was with him, and making sure that he knew where he came from, or the people that he came from. So the Bible tells us that he was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was mighty in the words and deeds. Look at Acts, I didn't put it up there. Look at Acts 7 and verse 22, if you will.
And Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was mighty in words and deeds.
Okay. So his life was divided naturally into 3 40-year periods. 40 years in Egypt, learning the wisdom of the Egyptians and about his heritage from his mother. And then 40 years in the wilderness, preparing for the 40 years of wandering yet to come. 40 years leading the children of Israel in the wilderness. So divided into three sections there. Any comments through verse 10? All right, look at verses 11 and 12 then. Billy, you want to read that?
Now it came to pass in those days, when Moses was grown, that he went out to his brethren and looked at their burdens. And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. So he looked this way and that way, and when he saw no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand.
All right, so okay. So the compassion Moses had for his own people is something to admire and to appreciate, obviously. However, his action was wrong, and he should have been in better control. During 40 years, Moses seemed to have lived as an Egyptian and did not seem to have regarded his oppressed brethren At this time, though, it came into his heart to visit them. And he likewise deliberately purposed to renounce the honors, the wealth, and the pleasures of his rank among the Egyptians, to cast his lot among Abraham's seeds, and to participate in their relation to the promised Savior, for the sake of which he was willing to share in the reproach and affliction which they endured as the people of God. Look at Hebrews, the 11th chapter, and verses 24 through 26. I know I have Acts 7, 23 through 25 up there, but...
From 24 through 26.
Yes, please.
By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to endure ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin.
Okay. So his mother obviously had informed him of his real descent then, and he would naturally feel an attachment to his people. Assured that Israel was the people of God and that the promises made to them would certainly be accomplished, he therefore went out to seek an opportunity of delivering Israel. Perhaps, and I say perhaps, Moses intended openly to join their interest. Don't know why. I mean, they're in slavery, they're doing all this work and everything, but he's expecting that they would cordially welcome him and concur with him in suitable measures. This again is perhaps, the scriptures doesn't tell us that, considering himself as acting under a divine commission in defense of the oppressed. Well, they don't know that yet either. But he took an opportunity of executing just punishment on one cruel oppressor. In this, he seems to have acted rather prematurely, for the spirits of the Israelites were sunk, and faith and hope were almost extinguished among them. Now, we'll not take time to read the rest of this chapter, but here's what I want you to see in chapter 2. Verses 13 through 14, Moses learns that others know about the death of the Egyptian. Now, I find that kind of funny because the Egyptian was beating up a Hebrew. I would think that Hebrew probably knew about this, but I don't know. But at any rate, when you look at verse 15, Pharaoh wants to slay Moses, so Moses now flees to Midian. In verses 16 through 20, Moses meets Jethro's family. Then 21 through 22, Moses marries Zipporah and has a son, and his son's name is
Gershom?
Gershom. Yeah.
Gershom?
Yeah, John, you have a comment?
But according to what it says, the Hebrews the one that told off on him.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because
There wasn't nobody else around, because he looked and seen there wasn't nobody else around. The only one there was him, the Egyptian, and the other Hebrew that was getting.
and that's what I say, because he later came back when two Hebrews were
Yeah.
fighting and everything, and they
We
said,
don't do
"Are you
things
going to
right."
kill us like
Yeah.
you did the Egyptian?"
But it becomes
So-
known to Pharaoh,
Do what?
so he can't keep the secret.
He can't keep it a
So,
secret.
so it becomes known to Pharaoh.
Yeah, yeah, and so Pharaoh is intent or intends to slay Moses, and so Moses flees to Midian then. And then verses 23 through 25, the children of Israel cry out to God regarding their bondage, and God hears their groaning. So here's some things I want you to see. A comparison of Moses to Jesus, all right?
I have a question for
Yes, John.
Okay, and let me find it. In verse 22, it says, "And he named his son." Most everywhere else in the Bible, the woman named the kid.
Yeah.
But this one, Moses named the son instead of the woman.
Yeah. In
Is
Gershom.
there any significance in that?
I don't know of any. I can certainly look and.
Because everywhere except for when Benjamin was named, the woman names the son.
Yeah.
Jacob changed Benjamin's name.
Yeah, in the case of Benjamin, God said this is what you'll call him. Yeah. So, but I'll look at that, John, and see what I can find. All right. So, a comparison between Moses and Jesus. Moses was born of simple parents. Jesus was born of simple parents. Moses, the Pharaoh issues a decree to kill all male children. In the case of Jesus, Herod issues a decree to kill all young children in Bethlehem. Moses would grow up to be the deliverer of his people. Jesus would grow up to be the deliverer of all men. Moses then was a foreign king, tried to have him put to death along with all the other Hebrew male children. In the case of Jesus, a foreign king tried to have him put to death along with all the other male children of Bethlehem. Moses was the son of Hebrews, but adopted by the daughter of Pharaoh. Jesus was the son of God, but was raised as the son of Joseph. Moses determined to be identified with the people of God. Jesus identified himself with all those who trust in the Lord. Moses murdered an Egyptian taskmaster in an attempt to defend an Israelite. Jesus gave his own life not only for the Jews but for all the world. Moses became a sojourner in a foreign land. Jesus left heaven to tabernacle with us. And that takes us to chapter 3, and we'll answer the questions next week. Any comments on chapter 2?
Yeah, don't you think that the Pharaoh kind of resented Moses because he knew he was a Hebrew, and they're going to even look different than Egyptians?
Well, that's a possibility. On the other hand, though, yeah, he was raised by his mother to a certain age, and at that point she was sent back to the Hebrews. And so, just like Joseph, he dressed like an Egyptian. He probably learned to speak like an Egyptian. And the Pharaoh, I'm sure, probably was not that close to him. His daughter was, because she was the adopted mother, if you will. But if the Pharaoh knew anything about Moses at all, he accepted the fact that Moses was an adopted child raised as an Egyptian and hoped that that would carry over.
Which would be different than killing your blood son,
Yeah.
grandson.
So do you think that she knew
They didn't bother
who Moses
to kill their own kid.
No, it was to have my glasses
Mother
on,
was?
but I can see he's totally.
I don't think the Pharaoh's daughter knew who Moses' mother was,
So
but
was
she
this
knew
a
she.
freak accident or just by luck that she got to be the one to nurse him? You know what I'm saying?
Well, no, Moses' sister Miriam was watching. Remember now, she's about 10 years of age at this time. And so she was watching, and there were a lot of Hebrew women that were having children at this time. So they could have found any Hebrew woman that their son had been murdered by Pharaoh because they were told to be put in the river that would still be nursing.
Right.
So as far as the Pharaoh's daughter is concerned, this girl could have grabbed any Hebrew woman to nurse the
That's
child.
part I would,
And she
so
took
that's how.
the effort of where the
Miriam asked.
Pharaoh's daughter didn't have to go hunt, this girl come up to find her for her.
Yeah,
So it was immediate right there, so she didn't have to do
So
nothing.
she didn't know it was her mother
Yeah.
necessarily.
I see the hand of God and all that.
Not at that time.
do what, Cal?
I see the hand of God directing the affairs there.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So,
That wasn't a coincidence.
Good
All right.
lesson, Dale, good lesson.
thank you. We'll answer the questions next week.
No road further too, I'll tell you.
Do what?
I was digging all the way through the Bible.
You get a lot of that later. You make you a chart, put them dates on there, and then add them up, and see if they come up to 430 years.
From what point?
From the point that all Jacob and all of them went to Egypt. Not
Okay,
the time
Jacob-
Joseph went, but the
Jacob
time
to Goshen?
Joseph went to Goshen.
Okay, you're looking at Jacob to Goshen, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, here's 1875 BC. That's Genesis, the 47th chapter. Well, actually, yeah, it'd still be 1875 BC because it's Genesis 46 where they went,
Yeah.
Jacob and family, all right? So you're looking at 1875 BC, and how far we want to go down?
Go down to Moses being born, that's what you said.
Okay, Moses being born. Birth and adoption of Moses, 1525. You're looking at 1775, 1675, 1575 is 350 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, then Moses was born, then he was 40 years, then he was 80, another 40, so he was 80 when the children come out.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah.
But that's not what you've been saying.
Well, I don't know what I've been saying.
You've been saying 100 years from Joseph's death. But from the time they went in, Joseph was 40. It was 120 years later. That way, where it's tagged up 130 years from Joseph, that's where I think the mix-up is.
What I said is, let me go back and look at my notes here now. I said, this decree was in force at the birth of Moses 64 years after the death of Joseph. Joseph died at 1806, okay?
Okay, now if that decree was in effect 65 years after Joseph died,
64 years.
64 years after Joseph died,
So, here's,
then that was in effect when Aaron was born.
no, wait, just a minute. Here, we're at 1806, and, well, it was,
See what I'm saying? 64 years after Joseph died, they was in captivity for 80 years. 64 years
no.
later is 140 years.
The decree was in force at the birth of Moses,
Don't
okay?
look at the birth of
And
Moses.
was probably enacted soon after the birth of his elder brother Aaron.
But you said it was enacted 64 years after the death of Joseph.
64 years after the death of Joseph, but his brother was only 3 years old.
So it couldn't have been 64 years after Joseph. It had to be longer than that.
His brother was born before the decree.
Yes.
That's what I'm saying here, and that's what I said here. I said the decree was in force at the birth of Moses, which was 64 years after the death of Joseph, okay? But was probably enacted soon after the birth of the elder brother, which was 3 years earlier.
Joseph was 40 when they went there. He lived to be 120. That's 80, right? Then 64 years after that. Okay, 80 and 64 is
But see, you're
144.
You're
Okay,
right.
now just a minute.
The
Just a minute.
64 years is not in play there.
64 years after the death of Joseph. That's the death of Joseph. Joseph lived to be 120. He was already there 40 years. So that leaves him 80 years in Egypt after the children of Egypt came to Egypt.
Do it this way. Quit looking at it that way. Here's
That's
the death
the way
of,
I'm looking at it.
Here's the death of Joseph, 1806 BC, okay? 1806 BC. Moses was born in 1525 BC.
Okay, that's a long time from 65 years.
But you're not listening to what I said in this. That's where we're getting.
But what we're getting confused is where'd you have that? That wasn't a page.
No, I'm turning back to it.
It's this way.
Yeah.
This
The
decree
decree was in force at the birth of Moses.
64 years after the death of Joseph.
It was in effect 64 years after the death of Joseph. Joseph died in 1806 BC. So you take 64 years from that, you're now looking at 1740. Yes, you are. It'd be 1740 because you're subtracting 64 years from that.
Okay.
Okay? 64 years from that, and the death of Joseph, which would put it at 1700 and let's see, 42. 1742. All right.
Okay. Now,
But
1742.
now he wasn't born. Birth of and adoption of Moses wasn't born until 1525.
Now, wait a minute. Wait a minute. That would put 1545, right?
1525. Yeah.
1525.
Yeah.
Aaron was born at what? 1529 or 27,
he
28.
was born 1528. Yeah,
Okay.
3 years prior.
Okay. See the 1700? It was still in effect at the time Aaron was born. So my question is, how did Aaron survive? And you said it wasn't in effect at the time Aaron was born.
Well, according to
That's
these
what I was
notes,
saying. My figures, the figures you're saying ain't adding up in my head.
I understand
That's
what
all
you're
I'm
saying.
saying.
I understand what you're saying.
There's a 200-year gap in there.
Yeah.
See? That's what I'm saying. There's a 200-year gap there that's not accounted for in the way you're saying it. To
Right.
me. The way I'm perceiving what you say.
No, I know what you're saying. This comes from various commentaries. This comes from a Bible timeline, and obviously they don't agree.
I
So,
don't think the timeline's correct.
well, it may not be. Cause it's man's speculation.
I know what I'm saying, I don't think the timeline's correct,
It may not be.
because it don't add up.
But, like I was saying though,
So it don't really matter though, because you got to start from Christ and work your way back. For that
exactly.
timeline to work.
Yeah, that's
And
exactly
there's a
right. Did you turn all
400
this off?
something year gap in
You
there. No,
did.
I did not. There's a 400 year something gap in there, I'll
Well,
take
it
it
looks
off.
like you turned everything off. Record and streams off.